Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exile in Bookville. I'm Javier Ramirez. I'm along with Kristen Gilbert, who isn't here today. She's got the day off. We run Exile in Bookville here in the beautiful Fine Arts Building in downtown Chicago. We're super lucky. This is a great turnout on a Sunday afternoon. Sundays are really busy for us, but thank you all for coming. When Alta approached me about this like 3 weeks ago, I jumped at the chance. Our mission, we're a general bookstore, but we also, if you can't tell from the name, we lean towards music. Exile in Bookville is a play on Liz Phair's seminal 1993 album, Exile in Guyville, which was produced here in Chicago. But we also love translated works and small presses. There's a table that's usually right here that's in the center room, so you guys could all sit here. That's has just dedicated to translated works and small presses, and we actually sell more of that than we do from what we call the Big Five publishers. So we're really, really proud to represent translated works from two of our guests, Alta Price and Izidora Angel. These are the books here. This just came out, like a month ago?
July 26th.
July 26th, yes. Time is a flat circle. I don't know what today is. But Alta translated these two titles here, which we have copies of, and Izidora translated this, which is one of our best sellers, by the way. We just actually sold 6 copies. We just got this one from Alta, in which we just put it on the table right next to this one here, and we're looking to sell it like crazy. So, and I don't know if you guys, do translators sign the books they translate?
Yes, we do.
Okay, okay,
Write their names.
Yes, okay, all right, you should, because you guys put so much work into it, and I'm going to stop talking and let the professionals take over. Thank you guys for being here so much, and thank you all for coming, and enjoy the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm not even going to bother to stand up. Welcome, welcome. Standing room only. There are a couple seats up here if you guys want to take seats. Thank you all for coming out on a Sunday that is sunny and then rainy and now Sunday and cloudy. So this is the final event of our inaugural Sant Jordi Chicago festival. And before I start rambling on too much about what literature and translation means to me, I would like to pass the baton to my colleague Marianne Newman, who translates from Catalan and can give you a history as to why we have gorgeous roses sitting between us.
Well, welcome. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much for coming on a rainy, maybe sunny Chicago afternoon. Sant Jordi Book Festival celebrates St. George, the Dragon Slayer. And in Barcelona, since medieval times, they were celebrating the Feast of St. George, which happens at the same time as the Rose Festival. So the gentleman would give a lady a rose to celebrate the holiday. In the 1920s, the Catalan Booksellers Association, the Barcelona Booksellers Association, decided to mix books into it. And it began with the gentleman giving the lady a rose and the lady giving the gentleman a book, which is a very good deal. So eventually it just became everybody gives everyone a book and a rose. But it's a beautiful, beautiful festival because Barcelona has all those promenades and they fill up with bookshelves, book stands and flower stalls. And it's the day on which they sell the most books in the year. So hopefully this will augur well for Exile in Bookville as well. So we started doing this in New York in 2014. We did lit crawls through neighborhoods. And in 2020, we went online, really. In a month, we flipped it online, and Alta we are now extending it beyond New York to the U.S. thanks to Alta, who has picked up the baton of St. George. It usually happens on April 23rd, but thanks to DCASE, we got a grant and so decided to do a half-year Sant Jordi. And welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming.
I think a bunch of you have our card. It was designed by Isabel Duverger of Isabel Duverger and La Cabrera, who did the website. I think some of you have seen And it lists also, I think, the Barcelona Football Club. This really started out as a Catalan-focused event, and when I got involved in 2020, that we sort of migrated. I was co-curating with my fellow German to English translator Tess Lewis. We were co-curators of Festival Journalists-turned-novelists, focused on German language literature and translation, and Sant Jordi sort of took us under their wing to go fully virtual. And I think, Marianne, what you've done in the service of Catalan literature, and if I don't want to get the name of the prize wrong, but it's the Premi Ramon Llull that you've been awarded. Marianne was our inaugural night presenter, so I think you've done so much work to bring Catalan literature and culture to the world, to the Anglophone world, but also to open the festival to other languages and cultures. So I'm really grateful. And I do want to extra thank DCASE, which means I'm thanking all of you. DCASE is Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and they help make this possible. But really, you guys make it possible by turning up and listening and reading. So with that, without further ado, I think we should just dive in.
Yeah,
we were planning on having this be the most casual. We don't have a moderator because we're both renegades.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were planning basically some conversation, some readings, some more conversation. I do want to start out actually, this is maybe we'll start with this question, or if you don't want to talk about it yet, we can save it for later, but Javier introducing the bookstore as based on the title of the Liz Phair album. It's really interesting because when I mentioned the name of this bookstore to a friend of mine, my friend said, oh, it's based on the Bob Dylan Exile on Main Street. Stones. Oops. Yes. So, if I had read more of the books focused on music in the store, I would have known that. But thank you, yes. So the Rolling Stone Exile on Main Street. But that was so interesting because that's one of those things where, these concepts, these titles, these notions originate in one culture and then get passed along. And maybe we'll talk about titles.
And she did that as a dialogue with that album. So it's like translation in a way.
Yeah, and interestingly, so my friend who did not know about Liz Phair, right? So it was just saw this other echo in the name of this bookstore, and then I said, oh yeah, but it's a more recent anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk about the title of your book, Izidora. Your plural, your Nataliya Deleva.
Yes, yeah. So the book was originally in Bulgarian. It was called The Invisibles, and it's because it sort of it has a weaving narrative throughout that follows this girl who grows up in an orphanage and just the horrors that she endures and the life she tries to make afterwards. But we thought Invisibles, and it's just superhero-ish, it doesn't necessarily sort of fit in. We thought one of the things that the book mentions is this experiment whereabouts if you looked into someone's eyes for 4 minutes, they cease to be a stranger or an other. And so we thought this title added kind of an urgency to it. And because all the little chapters in here are very short, very quick, it can almost be read in 4 minutes. We thought it kind of makes sense. And then we thought if people thought they could read it in 4 minutes, it'll sell better, because people just don't want to. So Yeah.
Well, and it's a very successful shift because before I even picked it up, it sparked curiosity in my mind.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
What is something happening in the span of 4 minutes in this book?
Yeah, yeah, and there was, yeah.
Yeah.
There's this episode that kind of, things that happen. There's these stories that kind of weave in and out of the main narrative that are not attached to it. They kind of spotlight different people on the fringes of society, and that's where the invisible sort of theme came in from, all these people that exist but are never given sort of the time,
Mm-hmm.
So, but it ties in with your book in the sense that both writers are these journalists that are now writing novels, and at the same time, it's like this hybrid idea of marrying fact and fiction and just kind of blurring the lines, you know, between that. So there's some very sort of, you know, purely fictional elements, but then there are these kind of snippets in here that are just almost like a essay form of.
Absolutely.
Know,
and I actually, so when I put this together, I wanted to be in dialogue with you because I love your translation work.
Thank you.
It's great to have an editor from Words Without Borders in the audience.
Yes.
You did a great interview, an excerpt published in Words Without Borders, so plug for Words Without Borders and the service they do to literature and translation. But as I sort of went back and revisited your book, I was stunned at the parallels. You know, these are very different books, totally different cultures, different languages, different times. And yet, what you're getting at, so to sort of stay with this notion of a journalist becoming a fiction writer, both novels, I had almost forgotten this, have newsworthy, let's say contemporary news-related, a disaster occur sort of, not exactly halfway, but partway through the narrative, and it really shifts. And that just stunned me because I'd read your book and I remember that, but as I was translating, you know, yours came out, I think, it feels super new to me, but it came out in
last year,
2021.
But it's kind of had a life after. It just sort of been, you know, it got reviewed by a couple places, and then the Bookstagram world took over, which is always like, okay, I mean, there's pretty pictures, like, are people really reading the books?
We all know people judge books by their cover.
Exactly. So it's actually really good to get a good book cover because you might, and it's very important to also have your name as a translator on the book cover, which we both do. I don't know if you had to fight to
I
have
did
yours.
not. I think my agent might have done a little fighting.
Good.
But
it's always good to have agents.
Changing. Yeah.
It's good to have people are fighting on your behalf for sure.
Yeah. So should we dive in with a reading?
Sure.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, you know, and I want to say, you know, one of the, it's like, you have these sort of almost like newspaper headlines kind of things in here as well in my book, and there's a lot of identity politics, but in mine, but they're done in a very different way than yours, and yours is a satire, and this is, you know, a bit more earnest and more like, you know, of soft in the way it approaches things. But I think the parallels are that you can't sort of create judgments, and the people who are on the fringes in this book, they don't, you know, like the part that I'm going to read is about this guy in a wheelchair who can't really speak, but he's getting laid, and it's like he's not going on Twitter asking, you know, to be seen or whatever. He just wants love, you know, and it's like that's ultimately where, you know, everyone comes from, I think. So
yeah, and no spoilers, but I mean, Mithu does end her novel with "Let love flow like a river." So do you think love is like this core, strange?
Yeah.
Both novels go dark places, but love does permeate them.
Yeah.
Surrounded by a lot of hate, but the love is there.
Yeah, but the love is there. Yeah. And we'll dive into like the Twitterverse and like the awfulness of that stuff with your stuff. But yeah, so do you want me to read a little bit of this one? And this one I haven't read, and it just occurred to me today that it might be a good way to kind of show this other, because a lot of the stories in here are bleak, you know, and that's not to say they're not like well written and like well thought out, but it's like very much there's pain, and this one I felt like actually goes the other way. So Goyan. When he opened his eyes again, she was still there, pressing her naked body against his, showering him with soft, barely there kisses. It hadn't been a dream after all. He felt electricity shoot up his body, turning him incandescent, and he was in fact certain that if someone had been watching them, he'd look like an illuminated lamppost. They were lying beside each other when a bug must have crawled up her thigh, because she suddenly flinched, folded herself in two, and slapped her leg. "Gotcha, little sucker." Her voice was soft in the dusk. The blaze of grass tickled him, and he squeezed her even closer to him. A cricket chirped into his ear, and somewhere off in the distance, the muffled sound of traffic crawled on by. Lavender perfumed the air, and he couldn't decide whether the scent rose up from the field that enveloped their bare bodies or if it was just the youthful fragrance of her 17-year-old body. He sank into her silken, sun-bleached hair and inhaled. It inebriated him, made the earth flip and the blood erupt in his veins. He thought that she seemed far too experienced for her age, flashed somewhere behind his eyes. But what did he know? He'd be 24 next week, and he never even been with a woman before. The grass imprinted on her skin stuck to her thighs and tickled her breast, but she paid no attention to it. Sucking on his mouth, his neck, his nipples, sliding down his body, her hair spilling across his stomach. He moaned as her body glided on top of his, teasing him, taking pleasure in his moans, which sounded more like bellowing and ignited her fantasies even more, and she chased after his ecstasy only to rein it back in. Her body fell back next to his. She was out of breath and on her back, her breasts perked up above the grass like mushrooms after rain, her skin damp, velvet, glowing. He felt her shiver slightly as her heart pounded, and he reached over to hold her, speaking sweet nothing in his mind, unable to break the silence. Right now, in this silence, was the first time he'd ever felt real happiness. Words seemed pitiful and unnecessary. They lay in the twilight as the sun elongated the shadows in the crevices of her olive-skinned body before licking the hills in the distance and melting behind them. When the last reflections of light skimmed her hips, everything became surreal. He lifted himself up on his elbows and kissed her eyelids, then gave her a soft pinch on the bottom. It was time to go. She giggled, bit his lip mischievously, moved a strand of hair from his forehead and turned on her stomach up against him, her eyes fixed on him as she played with his chest hair. She dressed him, put his pants back on by herself, then tied his shoelaces. She bent over all the way down and swung his arm over herself so she could position him over her back. He weighed at least twice as much as she did, and all her muscles tensed up, and she groaned as he unloaded him into the wheelchair. The grass lay flat, outlining where their bodies had just been. The lavender had evaporated and the crickets multiplied, chirping all the way back home. The two of them were silent. When they finally reached his neighborhood on the outskirts of town, she stopped the wheelchair, went around it, and put her beautiful face up within an inch from his. "I'm coming back tomorrow, you hear me, Kalo? You're gonna wait for me, right?" She looked him straight in the eyes, though willing him to understand her. He attempted to answer, but the same bellowing wrenched itself from his throat. He went red. She smiled. Of course he'd be waiting for her. She went back to pushing his wheelchair along the path, and he heard her sing in tune to herself. He thought of how, if someone had been watching him, he'd look like an illuminated lamppost. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if that was if I remember correctly, there was that moment of shock when I read that for myself.
Yeah.
You did give our audience here a heads up of, but it's really that pivotal moment where you realize, oh, this man has no legs.
Yeah.
And
it can't speak, really.
Can't speak, and if I've understood correctly, basically she's his caretaker, maybe?
We're not
totally clear.
Yeah, we're not totally clear, but it also doesn't seem like a situation where there's abuse going on necessarily, although, there it toes the line of you just, and there's a couple stories in there where you're just like, you wonder about that. But I think that's what, good art, asks questions, and it's not about necessarily condoning a way of life as much as it is about describing something,
Exactly. And I think in your translation, I have no access to the Bulgarian, right?
Yeah.
I know it's a different language, it's a different writing system,
Yeah.
but to me, what you do so successfully is leave those ambiguities, right? We get the little clues. She's olive-skinned. Okay, we don't know. Is he olive-skinned? Is he ivory? We don't know, right? And this is one of the parallels I saw with Identitti, where basically, for those who I haven't even given a little recap, but basically the main characters, this is one big difference between our books, I think, although the structure both of them have an incredibly complex structure, but the main character in Identitti is a doctoral student named Nataliya, whose PhD, her thesis advisor is unmasked at the beginning. Her thesis advisor is the #1 rock star post-colonial theory professor in Germany.
Who tells like the white students to leave.
She kicks the white
seminars.
Exactly. Kicks the white students out of her class. Everybody assumes, this is Professor Saraswati. She's Indian. She speaks perfect German. And she's got this tenured professor role. But so she's unmasked as actually being white at the beginning. And it was interesting the way that this book was written about in German versus now I'm seeing we're just starting to see how the readership in the US is responding.
Wait, how was it written about in Germany? Were people...
Well, the flap copy in German, it put white in all caps. The word white or weiße, when it appears in the original, is sometimes, usually italicized, not always. And these were things that you have to negotiate in translation.
Yeah, right.
Would it be appropriate or not? But I do remember when I first was in touch with the editor, I was, because they were looking. Some people had already submitted sample translations, and I basically said, I don't know if I fit the criteria, but you should know I am a all caps white translator.
No italics.
No, I didn't italicize it. That felt like overkill. But you do we never learn what Saraswati really looks like. We don't get a description.
Yeah.
And that, I do think some people are reading it and you're getting information and you're making assumptions based on her name. But it's that key moment where it just pivots and your entire sense shifts. This character is in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
This character is seen one way, but actually she's not. But then it all unravels because what is identity? What does it mean to be Indian or German, or can you be both?
Yes, yes. Well, that's actually my first question is, and you just described the kind of the plot of the book and the main sort of conflict. So, what was it like for you, coming into this German text written by an Indian woman who was born in Germany, who speaks British English, and her husband I think is British, and she's writing about these she writes in a satirical way, but it's not any less charged, the things that she's writing about.
Yeah.
So how did you sort of approach it as a all caps white woman writing about these very racially charged issues?
I think I struggle to answer that question in the sense that was it any different than anything else I've translated?
Yeah, because you have to dive so deep into it. Yeah,
because it's partially, to me, it's so hard to make generalizations about translation, right? And this came up actually yesterday. Some of you are welcome back. Followed the discussion yesterday, got into what do we do with potentially offensive language or language that's perceived as offensive in English and not in the language that these stories are originating in. And I don't know that there's a blanket answer. I can say that I had so much fun translating this novel. I was laughing out loud on certain pages.
Yeah.
And a big theme through the novel actually is how much contemporary German discourse on identity politics has just co-opted English terms, right? Because they sort of lack. Not that German lacks the language, but she does a deep dive into the word race in German, which is Rasse, and of course they have their heavily charged national social, World War II informs a lot of it. But I feel like I'm going to get way too off topic.
Yeah.
I can't give I feel as though the author is so well placed to talk about that, and I suppose if I have to give a brief answer or attempt a brief answer, it's that I really am beholden. I feel like maybe all translators, we're beholden to the source text. We're beholden to our English language readers, and we're kind of sort of beholden to the author. but I would say much less to the author than to the text itself.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't differentiating text and author, but you're right. There is actually pretty.
And I think one thing where, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, we're both very lucky in that. So Mithu speaks perfect English. Mm-hmm. Mithu has translated one of her previous nonfiction books as a journalist is about rape, and it's rape. The subtitle is From Lucretia to Mithu, #MeToo, and Verso Books published it, and she translated it.
And I love that her name is Mithu. Yeah.
It's really, no one else has talked about that, and to me it's hilarious. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. It's just, it's
I mean, it's spelled obviously the complete,
perfect,
but it's just, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Like, that should be a hashtag itself, you know. Do you want to read and then we'll go
Sure,
from there?
Yeah. I was just thinking, I mean, because I've read a few times, I wanted to read something new. The scene you chose had me thinking I should choose one of the more sexually charged scenes, but you know, I think most pages of this book are pretty sexually charged. So I'm actually going to, I know we were, for those of you who were here for Printer's Row a couple of weeks ago, did I read the blog entry at the beginning? Yeah.
I think so,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to skip that. It's short, but I'm going to dive right into the first chapter of the prose. And so one thing, and then maybe you can talk about how the novel you translated is structured, but this book is divided into sections. The first section is called Fake Blues, part 1. There are 3 parts of it. And the first part is called Fake Blues, and all the chapter titles are taken from blues songs. So in the German original, they were all English titles. But chapter 1 of, part 1, Fake Blues, is called Strange Fruit. The day Hell's jaws opened and spewed out a slew of howling furies started out like any other day, if any other day normally starts out with a rocket launch. It's not a rocket, it's a satellite, Nivedita read. At least that's how she interpreted her cousin's WhatsApp message. Preeti had actually written, "'Tis not arugula, it's a satellite," plus an emoji that looked like a bunch of asparagus. Nivedita gaped up at German Public Radio's 20-story concrete tower. It was perched precariously atop a spindly plinth that looked like a fiery plume, which seemed to be propelling the building skyward. She texted back, "Obvs, a rocket." At the building's peak, where the Saturn V rocket housed the Apollo spacecraft, flying buttresses formed an iron arrow in the glaring gray sky. Nivedita felt simultaneously sublime and insignificant in the face of this concrete spaceship whose entrance was crowned by a blue inscription, the news. "Imagine you're a terrorist who's killed several people," Preeti's next WhatsApp message advised, in an even more arbitrary array of letters. "Or that you're a terrorist who's already faked killing piles of peeps. This'll be a cinch." Seconds later, she texted, "One small step for you, one ginormous leap for humankind, ROFLLMAO." The glass doors silently slid open before Nivedita, and she entered the hallowed halls of National Radio headquarters. It smelled of candle wax and pleather, a blend of IRS and CIA, if news broadcasters could smell like James Bond films looked. She'd only caught a glimpse of the receptionist's suit through the glass doors, so when she strode over and he looked up, she was shocked to see he was no older than she. But that black uniform signaled that he belonged to a different generation and danced to a different drum, a rather more conformist one than she, unless he were to slip off his stage jacket or she were to shed her radical chic meets I'm in business outfit. Clueless as she was of the codes, Nivedita had done her long black hair up into a milkmaid braid that morning, and strand by strand it had been struggling free in silent yet staunch protest all day. "I'm here to be interviewed about my blog," she said, enunciating the phrase she'd practiced the entire train ride there. "Where?" the receptionist cryptically replied. Here?" "No, I mean, which department?" he asked, giving her a fatherly glance. For a second, Nivedita couldn't even remember her own name. She felt like a snagged zipper suddenly stuck, but then the midnight blue phone on the receptionist's desk rang, coming to her rescue. "Ni vidite Anand," she said, just as he hung up and announced, "They're on their way." Then she did what she always did when she wasn't feeling up to the task. She went to the bathroom. Not because she needed privacy, but so she could look in the mirror and make sure she was still there. The bathroom's frosted glass door bore an inscription, Frau, from Old High German, Fruva, lady or mistress, adult female. Definition varies according to geographic location, historical era, as well as societal and cultural norms. Her cell buzzed. "You in?" asked Priti. "Yeah," whispered Nivedita. "Why are you answering them?" Conversations with Priti were always on Priti's terms. At some point, she'd invariably remember she had more important things to do than chat with Nivedita, even if she was the one who'd called. Actually, especially if she was the one who'd called. That's why Nivedita didn't bother explaining herself or anything else and instead said, "You should see this bathroom. The door alone is a veritable intro course in German." "That's the spirit," Priti cheered. "Feel superior to the bathroom. Then you'll... Wait, something's come up, Niv." When Priti was in the right mood, she'd call Nivedita Niv, like the Irish name spelled Niamh, pronounced Neve. Priti was from Birmingham and had come up with this nickname not because anybody there had a clue how to pronounce Irish names, but because it highlighted that she was different. As if anyone would doubt that Priti was capital D different, capital O other. As long as she sprinkled her cousin with the stardust of her approval, Niv felt capital N noteworthy rather than not worthy. But Priti's moods were mercurial, and when she was feeling less generous, she'd call Nivedita Nivea, like the white skin lotion whose racist advertising regularly sparked scandal. I'm gonna pause there. Yeah, I'll pause there.
I love that, like the theme of invisibility that which goes through my book as well. And when one of the first sort of like conscious memories of the main character, she's like, I'm like 3-4 years old and I'm in this like horrible room in this orphanage and like I wish to be invisible, like to be, and so she struggles with that. And it's so interesting to see that like the main character is also like fighting against invisibility, but there are these, it's like the things that are eating away at her is like she's not authentic enough or she's not smart enough or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, it's interesting how those two fit together, where she's like taking her own identity sort of like, she struggles with it, it wasn't necessarily imposed on her, whereas the character in my book is like the other way around, where she was sort of rendered and invisible,
Mm-hmm.
but they're both struggling with trying to like be seen in the world.
Yeah, being seen, how we're seen, and how much identity is a combination of your own sense of yourself, but how the world reflects back to you what they're seeing.
And they create these categories,
Yeah.
and it's like, but you really don't have to internalize that. Like, you can have meaning, your life can have meaning, you can create that. You don't have to have like 20 boxes that you have to check
Mm-hmm.
to give yourself validation, in the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, you were just, I hesitated to where to cut off because there is a part where, so she gets up and she's going to be interviewed on the radio, and Nivedita is imagining what it would be like to have sex with the radio broadcaster who's about to interview her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she, for a second, she imagines what it'd be like to have sex with her dog, but then she goes back. I was trying to find like a sexual through line, but...
Put this kid in the front row.
Crossing those boundaries. But I think, so yeah, one of my questions for you actually, the ambiguity, I found a lot of, there's actually one section, I don't know if you want to read from it or not, where, what is it, Lady on a Park Bench, or The Lady in the Park? It's on International Women's Day.
Yeah, that one is tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to
I can read a little bit, or I can kind of talk about.
Yeah, I mean.
The
ambiguity there of basically what we would say nowadays, like that, the narrator in that specific section, if I understood correctly, is misgendering this child.
Well, no. So
No.
It's complicated. Yeah, my editor too was like, what's happening here? You know, it's a little bit complicated. But basically, it's a woman in the park with her what looks like her daughter with braids. You know, like 5 or 6 or something like that years old. And you know, she's calling her by this girl's name, and she's they're interacting in the park, and the narrator who's sort of witnessing this thing all of a sudden sees that like it's actually a little boy, and it's like, okay, you know, and the thing is like, well, where is it coming from? And the thing that makes it shocking is it's not the child who wishes to be identified as a different gender. It's the mother who lost a little girl, had a boy, and is now making the little boy have long hair and braids and dress like a little girl. And that's like the shocking part of it, because you're seeing this child is very conflicted and is obviously dealing with a mother with mental health issues, because the mother, you know, then kind of has a chat with the narrator who has witnessed, you know, these interactions. She's like, yeah, you know, I had a little girl and she died in a car accident, but God gave her back to me, right? You know, and the kid's
In
like,
a different body.
in a different body.
Yeah.
And then like again refers to the child and, you know, in the girl's name and everything. And the child's just sitting there like, you know, kicking its boots and stuff and just being like very uncomfortable.
And we find out, I think it's partially, there's a moment between the narrator where the mother has gone off to fetch this tattered doll that the child has thrown to play fetch with a dog, and you know, brings it back. But yeah, there was that was that moment of, oh wait, this character and that sense of like who's losing the grip on reality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was just like, I just thought it's very interesting, because you just there's, you know, people that are transgender have enough trouble getting, you know, going about life, you know, but then to just have that imposed on you because your parents not like all there, like I thought that did a very interesting take, that's something that's, you know, brings something different to the conversation.
Absolutely.
You could read it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's so beautifully translated, both of them.
So there was actually, I wanted to read this is kind of like where the title comes from. It's very short. 4 minutes is all it takes to accept a stranger. Look Beyond Borders is a 2016 project by Amnesty International Poland. It's based on psychologist Arthur Aaron's theory that looking into a stranger's eyes for 4 minutes is the most powerful way to bring people closer. The experiment takes place inside an empty warehouse in Berlin. Refugees from Syria and Somalia meet people from Belgium, Italy, Germany, Poland, and Great Britain. They sit across from each other and look into each other's eyes. No words, no gestures. 4 minutes. A cameraman records the interaction. The results stun. The initial skepticism and mistrust in the eyes of the participants vanish, replaced by friendly smiles and even excitement. After 4 minutes exactly, the interaction ends. Most of the participants can't hold back and cling onto each other in a deep embrace. Some of them cry. The campaign was launched as a response to the attitudes in several European cities regarding refugee families. According to the organizers, when you stand face to face with someone and look into her eyes, you can no longer see a refugee with no identity. You see a person just like you, someone who loves and suffers and dreams. At the end of the video, a young woman turns to the camera and says of the man whose eyes she has just finished gazing into, "I hope he asks for my number." So I love how, you know, I mean, think, you know, like, I feel like if I looked into someone's eyes for a moment, I would start crying too, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so it's and this is the example. This is an example of how she goes sort of nonfiction with it, and just like, you know, kind of crafts, adds these like little nuances, little layers to the overall sort of story about the acknowledgement of the humanity of your fellow, you know, human.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I wanted to ask you, you know, your translator's postscript is just so awesome and so great, and I always feel like when I finish the book and then I write like either an introduction or kind of like a translator's note, like I feel like my writing is at its most sharpest at that moment, because I've just done this incredible like labor, you know, and I thought your essay, I think you know, I think it's like a publishable, you know, essay that you can just publish on its own. Like it's so good, and I would urge you guys when you buy the book to actually start with it, because you say in your postscript that, you know, it wasn't as simple as bringing the novel into English. The text was remarkably polyphonic, featuring German and Englishes rather, because there's a few different types, French via English translation, sprinklings of other languages, and a whole lot of super loaded woke language that, you know, is a whole category in and of itself. So I wanted to ask you about the challenges of that, you know, which I know are like immense.
Yeah. And I mean, short of saying like, just go read the book and then tell me what you think, I don't know if I succeeded. This is where I think, you know, one other commonality that you and I have is that these are both living authors who have a wonderful, you know, their level of English is such that we can really have,
get their input.
Get their input, and discuss. And it's funny because you know, people frequently ask, well, how much do you collaborate with the author? And this definitely, I can tell you, I sat down and I worked through it. I did not send any queries at all.
Wow.
I was like, I wanted to do the work, and I've got sort of my questions for myself, and I have pages and pages of notes, but I'm going to send her the solutions I landed on and see. And if she has serious misgivings or questions, we can talk about it, and I can offer alternate things. I think one of so for instance, and this other theme that comes up so much for me in translation, especially, it's come up in the past, but especially in this book, is translation as a potential violation. Yeah. And so for instance, the second chapter in part two is titled Pop Post-Colonialism. The second chapter was called Black Skin, White Masks in the German book. And it starts out with an excerpt of, it quotes Frantz Fanon. And I thought, okay, well, I personally know that Frantz Fanon was writing in French, not English. So why is this chapter titled English? And I think it was, you know, Mithu and I actually haven't even discussed this. I know I did say, like, is it okay with you that I put this back into French? Because to me, it's different, especially out of respect for where Frantz Fanon was coming from. So I added, like, I went back, now it's peau noire, masque blanc. So I said, you know, that complicating factor of, to me, the French origin there, with all of that baggage and history, was in a way being erased. And it, like, I'm not saying that it was a problem in German, because I don't think it was. I think, you know, you get to the end of this book and you do have an entire reading list if you want it, if you want to avail yourself of these other, she doesn't even say recommended readings, but, you know, if you want to know more or where these excerpts come from. So that was one thing where I felt like, to me, it seemed natural to add to it in that way, but I absolutely wouldn't have done it if it wasn't okay with the author. And that's where I'm really lucky in that she she even said to me sort of, where you take more liberties, it's closer to my original intent. Right. And not that I knew that as I was taking those liberties, but I felt like I see what the German is saying. I know that, you know, this character is maybe in this instance, in this specific scene, acting despicably. or is feeling misunderstood and is behaving this way, but and I just, the voices were coming to me in English and I just got them down in my English, And then the process, so this is actually coming out in an anglicized, a British, like UK, Ireland, Europe edition through V&Q Books, and that comes out on October 1st. And that was an amazing learning process for me.
Okay.
The little things like that excerpt where I read a blend of CRS and CIA and IRS.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they had to change.
Yeah.
They had to change the acronyms, right? And that was completely fine, and other little details, but it was a process. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
Yeah, I think you gave a glimpse into just how insanely difficult, like how wide your frame of reference has to be in order to do this text justice, so that you're not like simplifying things, or glossing over things, but like you went deep, like you went several editions into this one book, right?
The Joy of Sex.
Yeah, which kept getting sort of like, made, brought to to a place where it was like fine for the times,
Yes, yeah, and I did not. I got really lucky because a friend, a publisher I've done translation work for, who then became a friend, had her mother's copy of The Joy of Sex on her bookshelf. So we were having this catch-up phone call, and I said, I'm really struggling because I can't find, I don't know. They're quoting the 1972 edition of The Joy of Sex that was translated into German. And of course, it's a section that has the N-word, right? And that's the whole, I don't, this is, I think an entire other book could be written about words like that, because German doesn't distinguish.
And Bulgarian doesn't either.
Yeah. So it was complicated because I'm like, okay, this one character is quoting The Joy of Sex. I was like, was the N-word in The Joy? I've dipped in and out of The Joy of Sex over the years, but it wasn't the first edition, and it's changed. Each edition of The Joy of Sex has had to update, right?
Yeah.
Because especially, so they updated during the AIDS crisis. They updated, and I found this particular. It became. I thought, this will be relatively easy to solve. I'll just get my hands on this book and find out what the English said, and it just so. Mithu Sanyal was quoting the German edition of so it was translated, but maybe we don't all know this. It's always worth saying that translation is not taking one word and turning it into another. There's almost never that direct, run it through Google Translate.
Yeah, it'd be so easy if it
some
was,
algorithm can do it, just go to the dictionary and switch out the words. That's not what it is.
No.
So it was interesting because that entire scene in German, I realized I had to remind our English language readers who were reading my English language translation that this is taking place in Germany. Mm-hmm. And this one character keeps using the N-word because it comes up in the book, and then the other characters are saying, please stop saying that. And even typographically how it was handled in the book has changed in the German edition has changed. They went from blanking out the word to using the asterisks to then using a black redaction box, which to me was very successful. It's just sort of always shifting, just like our notions of what is respectful, acceptable language and what isn't.
Yeah, and it all evolves over time.
Yeah.
So another thing that's a big part of the book is like the social media aspect, and like she takes sort of real tweets, right, like real sort of thing, but she fictionalizes so the ways, like the context in which they're set, right? Did I get that right?
She had, so basically, and I should get the exact percentage, but I know that also has changed from edition to edition of the German version. She had real people in the real Twitterverse, and this is partially her background as a journalist. Mm-hmm. I do not want to speak for my author, but my interpretation of it is that the Twitterverse can be a really awful place.
Oh yeah.
But journalists kind of have to be there.
They have to, yes.
And it was brilliant. So part of me was like, is this just a publicity stunt? She sent a bunch of fellow Twitter people who were actually on Twitter with actual real Twitter handles and said, here's the premise of my book, can you contribute a tweet? Will you donate? And then, so you got real people who said, okay, in this situation, if there were this Twitter storm happening, I would say, so real figures, but that's only about half of them.
Okay.
The other half are made up.
Yeah.
And they're made up, they're hilarious.
Yeah. No, they are.
But they're really dependent on, you've got like this repetitive, and you're like, oh, this is the far right wing troll.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So they're sort of the tropes. But I had to look up every single one.
And how is that for you? Because you're not on Twitter.
I'm
like
not
you
on
don't
Twitter.
do that. And is generally translation Twitter is a pretty friendly place. Like you're not gonna it's pretty small corner of the internet in general, but we're just like advocating for things and like asking for our rights, basically. And like we get support from people and everything like that, but like identity politics Twitter is like, oh my god. So like, did you go native? Like, did you like go in there? And what was that like?
Well, so at one point I was like, shit, I'm gonna have to get on Twitter to translate this book.
Yeah.
I didn't. I started making an account and I was like, this is a step too far. No, I can find out by searching whether this person is real or not. There were German-language journalists who I recognized. I was like, okay, I know this one's real. I'll double check that that's their Twitter handle. This other one is obviously fake because it's way too hilarious, but I still have to check. So I had to do a lot of research, and it was fun and horrifying.
And yeah, it's fun when you're kind of an audience member, kind of. You're not participating, and then like you don't actually get exposed to the mob.
Yeah, and so much. And I should say this also, just to go back. I do want to, and then we'll open it up to audience questions.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk all afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of each of these novels, but I think one important thing to say is that there are entire scenes that happen in the form of Twitter posts and answers and people trolling each other, a couple Facebook posts, but this was a brilliant choice on the author's part, I think. She suspected or she knew that she would lose readers. Like, so I'm not on Twitter, right? And I'm like, I'm reading this, and so there were also, speaking of adaptations, like an audiobook adaptation. This book is incredibly hard to read out loud because so much of what's happening makes perfect sense on the page, but how do you pronounce it? When you get combinations of letters and numbers and just that the encoding of language and humor and insults and things like that. So she did design it so that the narrative, if you are a reader where you're not on Twitter, you don't want to deal with this, like, what is this, too many internet acronyms, internet speak. Yeah. You can just skip those sections and you still understand what's happening in the narrative. I mean, you're going to miss a lot of humor. Yeah. But you won't miss what's unfolding over the course of the book, which I thought was brilliant in terms of how she structured it. Yeah. And I do know translators who have to, or feel as though they have to, or want to adapt how a narrative is structured, so that it either, I don't want to say so that it makes more sense, but like, I just thought, I find the internet speak vexing and challenging, but this is what this book is, and I went in knowing that. Yeah. So I was up for it, and I had to learn new things, which is always
you definitely brought it, like all that super like current kind of language with the abbreviations and the acronyms and the even I think you did great. Yeah.
Thank you.
I know you just said it's impossible to read, but would you read a little bit of it?
The internet speak?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so like that one part I was like, how do we read do we say, I know it's rolling on the floor, laughing my ass off. Mm-hmm. Do I say it's capital ROFL? Yes. LMAO. Let's see, a section where people are tweeting at each other? Oh, Marianne, of course you're going to ask this. Let's see. Okay. Yes, I can do this. I can do this, right? Yeah, here we go. Okay. Page 175, and this is the other interesting thing. To me, I saw parallels with Boccaccio's Decameron. I haven't said that to anyone before, but so the author might disagree, but she has this countdown of like, so once Sarasvati is unmasked or debunked as being, not who she was claiming to be, of course the university is trying to fire her. Of course, her lawyer is getting involved. And what really happens, and this actually goes back to like the sense of invisibility and people on the margins and the power dynamics of any human relationship, Nivedita moves in with Sarasvati, and nobody sees that coming. It happens fairly early. But then so for instance, this is a section that is 5 days post Sarasvati, right? So we know Sarasvati is no longer Sarasvati, she's now Sarah Vera from, I think, Dortmund, or and Nivedita's like, I can never, she actually, this is a big, thank you, I'm getting there. Nivedita feels like an orphan at some point, because she's like, what am I gonna do? I'm working on my dissertation.
Yeah, she's so tied up with like her PhD,
she was on the path,
person.
And she was studying with the perfect person until, the perfect person was no longer the perfect person.
But can I just insert this, that like, so Sarasvati's like kind of the, the bringer of the chaos and the like fake person, but then she's someone who actually says things in the book that are like, that makes sense. You know? So she is, but then she's like, well, actually, the way to combat racism is to ask questions. And like some of the things she says to me don't sound like someone who's like blind and stupid to the idea of like how you relate to your fellow human beings. So that's why she's a very complicated character, because she's,
And her seminar has allowed Nivedita to see herself, right? Sarasvati's seminar.
Yeah.
So that's what, and that is why, I think, my speculation as the translator, I think Nivedita moves in with Sarasvati to, like, I have to get to the bottom of this. I want more answers. She doesn't get answers. She leaves with more questions. And as actually as Mithu, the author, said in one of our earlier conversations, she was like, everybody's talking about all these other identity politics and gender dynamics. Nobody has talked about the fact that this PhD student moves in with her professor.
Right.
The power dynamics
because they're both women or something.
Sexual tension, and it's messy, and it's So, but I'm sorry, Maria, you wanted to hear me read some of the
That's great.
So 5 days post Sarasvati. All right. And I don't want to read for too long, so I'll just give you a snippet. Nivedita pushed open the door to the tobacco shop that now doubled as a post office, since so many post offices had closed and so few people bought tobacco anymore. Packages yet to be picked up and packages yet to go out took up most of the room, and the line for the post office services seemed as if it were mocking the total lack of customers at the tobacco counter, as if to say, see? Just look, everybody in every socioeconomic class wants box-shaped consumer goods, but smoking was a thing of the 80s. And under the new healthcare guidelines, who in the underinsured middle class can afford it? This was the first time Nivedita had set foot outside Sarasvati's place in 4 days, even though there was no logical reason she'd limited her own movement like that. No right-wing mobs were waiting in ambush outside the front door, wielding baseball bats manufactured in foreign sweatshops and blue, biodegradable, in spite of themselves, balloons emblazoned with the AfD logo. AfD is Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany. That's their far right-wing party. Not a single crowd of woke students was patrolling the streets of Obervilk, and nobody was brandishing a loudspeaker shouting for Sarasvati to show herself. Although hashtag transracial was still trending, even on social media there were only a few isolated accounts defending it, like on Facebook, excerpt. Hilal Shagin. The opinions I'm seeing tagged hashtag transracial seem to be seesawing toward a mob mentality, and people, I'll totally understand if you pillory me for this, but I've just got to get it off my chest. Over the last decade, we've learned that there are more than two sexes, and that the presumption of heteronormative secondary sex attributes is overly restrictive, or can be. We've also argued against racists for decades, stating that nothing like race actually exists, and that all people are in some sense related to all other people. And now we're accusing someone, a person who doesn't feel they belong to the exact race their family tree would suggest, for opting out of one self-chosen category and opting into another, ? And then, so there are a few answers on Facebook to that Facebook post. Meanwhile, I'll try and do the Twitter speak. Meanwhile, in the parallel realm of the Twitterverse, Ruprecht Polenz, @Polenz_R. This is just like @Build's reaction to Günter Wallraff back in the day. The people who've been unmasked get all hot and bothered about the masks and the people who fell for them instead of dealing with their own behaviors and actions. #stop discriminating. A Twitter reply to that, Mary quite contrary. So I don't know if you guys, so Twitter you can have a name and then you have a Twitter handle, right? So the name is Mary quite contrary, and the Twitter handle is @Maria Diallo. So all of these identities, there are markers in all of these names. Sarasvati can choose whatever skin color floats her boat. Those of us born into brown and black bodies cannot. We can't just up and peel off our own skin, even if we wanted to. #SharasvatiGate, #racism. Answer to that tweet, Justin E.H. Smith, who is not only a real philosopher, but we wrote for the same website back in the day. So when I came across that in the original, I was like, wait, I know him. Justin E.H. Smith, @JEH Smith. Since when is there a moral duty to remain faithful to the accidents of your birth and to accurately report your vital statistical information to the whole world? I don't give two shits what my ancestors say about who I really am. We all have a right to reinvent ourselves. Lars Weisbrod, @Lars Weisbrod. Can't we please discuss money and economic theory instead? Next tweet, Call Me Zadie, @Outside Sisters. This is the other character, Oluchi, who is a fellow student of Nivedita's. What about whiteness as a commodity? What Sarasvati's up to is racial capitalism, being POC as product. #transracial is not a thing.
Wow.
And I'll end it there.
Racial capitalism? Is that what, I've never heard that. Did she invent that, or does it exist?
I think it exists.
Okay.
This story you need to do more exploring on the internet. Obviously.
So no, but that's one
God.
thing. There was a #brown facing.
Okay.
So a lot of
Yeah.
these I was like, I know this hashtag exists. Other ones I was not sure. So I tried to double check all that.
Wow.
As far as I could ascertain, there is a #blackfacing. When I searched for #brown facing,
Yeah.
all I was getting was hits that led me back to the German edition of this
Okay.
book.
Wow,
So-
so she invented a new hashtag, basically.
It appears that way to me.
Yeah.
But then I thought, how did we not have that before?
Because
Yeah,
there
right.
wasn't a commodification. Rachel Dolezal was able to capitalize on being black, but so far people haven't tried to capitalize on being Indian or
Yeah.
South Asian.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll wrap it up with this. That's another interesting.
She's a very interesting person.
Yeah, I think
she's
that's the
very-
snippet way of when people asked what I was working on, I said I'm translating a contemporary satirical German novel about identity politics, and I didn't say anything else. But I think the other brief way to encapsulate what this book is it's the Rachel Dolezal case, transferred to Germany, but with all these other factors.
Yeah, instead
But
of
that was definitely,
in politics or whatever, she's in she's in
academia.
Yeah.
And there are so many other campus novels right now that are also dealing with, campus life and generational differences between professors and students. I forgot the other thing I had to say.
Sorry, yeah.
No, fine. No, you didn't at all.
Well, should we open it up to...
Sure. I feel like the audience is already starting to get involved, so we might as well just open the floodgates.
Yeah.
Questions? Thumbs up. I like thumbs up. Yes.
Alta, did anything happen any news event happen in the course of your translation that either reflected or perhaps illuminated, like a lamppost, or perhaps enhanced or reflected in some way events in the narrative?
I feel like there must have been things. Yeah. But this came out in German in March of 2021. Is that possible? I think I got that right. Yeah. And so I was working on it from like April through November of 2021. And I feel like things are happening all the time.
Yeah. I mean,
Especially
we're
living in
right.
Chicago.
Yeah.
Local news.
I mean,
right?
but you had obviously George Floyd and like
George Floyd
yeah,
was before.
was
Yeah.
that 2020?
Yeah.
So this was like so we're like still a pandemic.
Yeah.
Still there's
And that's
just
a
a
whole
lot
other
happening.
yeah, it's and there is a lot of tension between like the black Germans of African descent and the Nivedita I should also specify her father is Indian and her mother is German of Polish descent. And in one scene, both of her parents are like, good thing racism, they don't say racism is gone, but they're like, you don't have it the way we had it. And they both are sort of saying, you've got it good, kid. And, clearly what happens in this book and what is happening in reality in the world, both in Germany right now and in the United States and in Chicago, like, it's not like anybody has it that good, It's changed, but this was written after George Floyd, and the students do engage with that, and there is a big protest. Students are protesting, to either in defense of Sarasvati or to get rid of her. So, yeah. Marianne?
This is a translation nerd question, I think, but are all of the chapter titles in English?
No.
Because the question of, do you think Black Skin, White Masks is in English because German people read that book translated into English?
I think so. Yeah. I'll have to check with Mithu actually. And that's one thing where in this, because I'm putting it back to Peau Noire Masque Blanc, but I also so I got the English language Frantz Fanon excerpt, but I specify that it's translated by Richard Philcox, who is Maurice Condé's spouse, and is translating her. So there's just so many connections. Yeah, actually, now that I'm looking at it, so yeah, Fake Blues, all of them were in English. Yeah, no, they were, the titles, like the last chapter, or the last chapter of part 2, Decolonizing the Mind. Can the Subaltern Speak as a reference to Gayatri Spivak. So,
Decolonize, I think that's Gugi Wationgo, no?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, the Can the Subaltern Speak was, the location of culture. And that was one thing when I first read it, it's like, why are all the chapter titles in English? The book is in German, but it had a lot of English in it. Yeah. It was a wonderful mess.
Yeah. But is that significant though? I mean, do you think there's a kind of shadow reference to the way racial politics are reflected through the states?
Yeah. And Sarasvati says that in the book. Sarasvati says, we don't have the language. We're using all these English terms, but some of us understand what the English terms mean and some don't. But yeah, like we need new language for all of this in every language. How do we talk about this? But we do have to talk about it. Like that's the general, I think,
or
overarching.
invent a new way to look at it, because when the Anglophone world is just so dominant and just pushes things down. It's such a huge cultural trade deficit that exists with sort of the rest of the world. So it's just like well, what's a better way to say it? Like, how to like invent your own way to say it. I mean, Bulgaria does this a lot too. They'll just like take the word straight, you know, and just plug it in, and then you just get this horrible mess of like, you know, conjugations that were just never meant for that language, and you're just like taking the English thing, just adding things to it to make it Bulgarian, but it's not, you know. It's like, it's laziness, I think, you know, culturally, to just take something like that and like adapt it in a way and not add your own take on it.
Yeah.
Or it's creativity. I mean, you know, English does that. It imports the other language and just messes with it. I think
Yeah, it just always seems like weird when you see it in the Bulgarian side of things, because like
gender.
Yeah. And so you're
Sharks, layers, and
yeah.
Another question.
In your translation, did you use the word woke? And did I mishear that, or?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm interested in.
Was woke in the original?
Yeah,
I should've
and
brought the
I'm
original.
interested to know how, you know, what that looks like in German, and also if it's in Bulgarian. I mean, if wokeness exists as a word, or, you know, it's a question for both of you.
I'm so excited for this answer.
Yeah, Vanya, help me. Does woke? Does it get like just transliterated? Like where the?
I don't know.
Yeah. Do we even say anything like that? What do we even, you know?
Is it even an issue?
Is it a thing?
Gets dismissed out of hand in Bulgaria, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, probably. We're on the other side of woke. What's the opposite?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's good question.
I don't want to be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure the word woke appears.
And do they say woke or folk? Or I wonder what it's like.
I'm not going to put members of the audience in the hot seat.
Oh.
I've never heard it said. That's another thing I haven't heard it said out loud. Man, I feel underprepared for this. This examination that's happening. No, but it is funny. That's part of the translation process. Is, you know, we have to like, the whole book is in there and we process it, but then it becomes this other book. And, certain parts I remember, like, definitely I remember how that was in the original, and the other ones, like, I have to go back and
No,
look.
because it's just so many times, you know.
But I do feel like it was woke in the original German.
I could imagine that Germans use the word woke.
Yeah.
I don't think they have that.
Yeah.
But if it's an Asian sandwich in Bulgaria, I can't even tell.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I think there's like politically correct or whatever that's so old now at this point, I think.
Do Bulgarians say
they say politically correct, but they still use it like a little bit ironically. So we're dealing with you know.
And that brings me to my question from yesterday. So have you encountered any words that would not be politically correct in the States, and yet they would be in your, you know, in your author's language? And I'm asking this because when Stephen and I have been translating this crazy author who has a kid with severe intellectual disability, and she calls him the R word. And so we were asked by, you know, the poem got accepted to this magazine, but they wanted us to change it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So what I'm asking is, how do you deal with these things that could potentially cancel your author, and also, you know, in the States?
I mean, it's very, you know, in Bulgaria you still say gypsy. You know, and
that was my thought. That gypsy is in the
I thought a lot about it, and I talked to Amaya a lot about it as well, and she said you should change it, and I was like, you know, but I think it's from the point of view of someone who is looking at the little kid in that way, and it is not sort of what we're asking the reader to perceive. You know, we're not asking them to like be on our side by calling this, you know, derogatory name, but it's supposed to be racist. It's supposed to be. Do you know what I mean? So like you're always kind of the N-word. Just use you know, completely over dinner without a second thought. In Bulgaria, you know.
Is there that word or
no,
like a similar?
But in writing, you would see it, you know, and there's a long way to go in a lot of these things. But I mean, you have to understand that like Bulgaria was colonized for 500 years. Like, you understand that. So like the fact that there's even Bulgarian to be translated is a miracle. The fact that the people still speak it, that their literature survived, that they survived, that their religion survived, like that's a miracle in itself. So like you can give them a little bit of a break, you know. But it's you know, it's an uphill battle. But for sure, there's one piece in here that very much like toes the line of like white savior, you know, because she runs into a pregnant Roma girl who's stealing bread, you know, and she gets like beaten up, you know, and like she's like, okay, I'm gonna take you out to dinner and everything like that, and it's like it gets close to just being, you know, kind of like, well, what are you doing, you know, here? So you just have to, you know, that's why as translators, I think we just have to be completely aware of, you know, the things that are happening, and you know, we have to serve, like you're saying, like the text and the language and the author and our reader and readers. Hopefully not just one. But no, you're gonna make mistakes though at the same time as well, and I think that shouldn't, you know, cause you to not, you know, ask questions. You know, people are so afraid of like, you know, like I read this thing, and I just think this is the last thing I'm gonna say, but you know, I read this it was like a Dear Abby thing in the Tribune the other day, and it was Miss Manners, I think it was. It's syndicated in the thing, and the question was, I have a friend from, and she's got like an exotic accent, and I don't know how to ask her, you know, where she's from, you know, and Miss Manners goes, don't. And it's like, really? You're not gonna ask your friend where they're from? You're gonna say like the accent's a bad thing? Like it means that they speak at least one more language. Like you should be asking, you know. So like, but then it's like the where you're from, like, but where are you really from? Yeah. But it doesn't, like, different people can ask you the same thing. Like different people can say the same thing, and it is gonna mean completely different things. Like somebody's trying to make you feel like you're foreign or other, and they're gonna be like, well, where are you from? Oh. Someone else, you have to understand the intent of that question. Someone else might ask you because they're probably from like the Balkans too, you know, and they're like your neighbors. They want to know where you're from. So you should not just like not ask people where they're from and like what their accent is or what other, you know, actually you should not ask what their accent is. You should ask, what other languages do you speak?
There
like that's what you should ask. So anyway.
Conversation to be had. There are like snacks and refreshments in back. There are lots of books to buy, and we'll sign books.
Yeah, and thank you, Javier, again for hosting us and making
Thank you both for being here. Thank everyone for coming. I set up a table outside for the snacks.
Thank you.
Also a signing table out there for you guys to sit in front of each other.
Great.
If you guys could do me a favor, as you get up, just put your pull your chair and switch to the side, and I'll collect them. Don't worry about it. Just so you guys can.
Thank you so much.